Oh, it's looking good. Coffee's flowing. It's time to get going.
Hey, welcome back to Questions Over Coffee. My name's Kevin Smith. It's good to see you again. Want a cup of coffee? Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss anything that's coming up on Questions Over Coffee. If you have a comment or a question, leave in the section below. We'll get to it just as fast as we can. Today's question comes from Sam I Am. Sam writes, Acts 2:42. Why don't we meet in houses? Sam, this is a great question. And honestly, we do need to consider this because, well, houses do offer an intimacy that a building does not offer. But I will say, first thing is that there are situations and places in the U.S. even where there is a house church or Christians meeting in a home for one service, let's say, one meeting, Bible class or Bible study, things of that nature. So there are situations and entire house church meetings in some cases, even in the U.S. I can tell you, I worked for many years overseas, and the entire time we were over there, we met in a house church. It was one of those things that meeting with the brethren over there was frowned upon heavily by their government. I will not tell you which one, but so we were meeting in our home, and often it was our apartment. Not always, but often it was our apartment that we were meeting in on Sundays, and as well as studies throughout the week. So there are situations where a house church is the viable option, let's say. But let's go ahead and I'm going to give you at least 3 different reasons why, at least I've heard, that churches do not follow the house church model in the U.S. The first one is just straight up convenience. I can tell you, based on my past with house churches, it is a lot more convenient in some ways to go to a church building. There's less cleanup in many ways. You've got folks that will come in and clean during the week so that it's ready for the next Sunday, or in some cases Wednesday, where a house church, whoever's hosting, you generally have 30 minutes to an hour before everybody begins to arrive, and then you've got to put everything back together after they leave, which is another 30 minutes, sometimes upward 2 hours, depending on the crowd size and things of that nature. So convenience is an issue, as well as things like supplies for communion, song books, storage for the song books, things like that. So convenience cannot be understated in this case. But just because it's convenient to meet one place doesn't necessarily say, hey, that makes it right. That's not necessarily the case. Although I will say meeting in a building together is not necessarily a wrong idea. The early church met in the temple and also from house to house. So that is something to consider. The second reason that I have heard is that people won't be able to find us if they're traveling through. And I will admit, in some ways, that is a valid reason, but also I will tell you that if we are doing our job and if we are better connected as a Christian community, there are ways around that. While we were overseas, we had a network kind of set up to where if someone was traveling to a certain city, they would talk to whoever was leading the house church and say, do you know anybody in X city? Well, the leaders would be able to email someone and say, is there somebody here? And at that point, they would be able to pass on the information. So it would just take being more organized in ways that we're not necessarily as organized. The thing that we do in the Rock Springs congregation is on Sunday nights, we'll meet in 2 different homes. And we thought, well, maybe this will cause an issue. Well, it did not cause an issue. What it ended up doing was if somebody was coming through, we had a phone number on our website. We had a phone number on the little message board out front. The person called that number, got directions to the home, assuming it wasn't at my home, which is next to the building, and they went and joined in. It was one of those things where just a little bit of pre-planning leads to the house church model being more accessible in the U.S. The third reason that I'm going to give you is that the leaders, the eldership, will have a harder time to monitor what is being taught in each of these house churches. In some ways, yes. And certainly we saw that while we were overseas. We would send someone in occasionally to make sure that the message was being taught right. And there were certainly some differing ideas. That is in some ways a valid reason. In some ways, it's an easy enough reason to work around by simply taking the elders and saying, okay, you go to this house church, you go to this house church, and we'll meet back and compare notes. Things like that. But overall, I would say that this is probably not as big of an issue because in each of your house churches, at least my experience is that we had people that knew their Bibles very, very well, and they wanted to make sure that the ideas that were in Scripture were what was being taught. And it, at least so far, has seemed to be just fine. So there are ways of working around it to where leadership can have their finger on the pulse, so to speak, to make sure that things are taught right, taught well, and people continue to grow and mature in the Word. At least those are 3 of the reasons that I've heard most prevalently. There are probably others as to why the U.S. churches don't generally meet in houses. I have a question for you. What are some of the advantages of meeting in a home versus meeting in a church building? Leave me a comment in the section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss anything that's coming up on Questions Over Coffee. Thank you for our time together today. I look forward to the next time. Keep pressing forward.